Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Hare
Krishna.
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 Hare
Hare.
Hare
Hare.
Rama.
Rama.
Hare
Hare.
Rama.
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 Hare
Hare.
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 Thank you all for coming on a Sunday morning program. Hindi, English, Gujarati, what these are the three languages I know. So thank you all. Dear Krishna Prabhu and Mataji for having wonderful program, Sunday morning program. Thank you for hosting His Holiness Chandrasekhar Swami Maharaj. We are very fortunate to have him here. He is the direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada, who has started the Hare Krishna movement or Hare Krishna Andolan, as we say in Gujarati or Hindi. That was started by Srila Prabhupada in 1965 in New York City, in actually a smaller place than this, maybe a little bit more longer. And anyone visited 26 2nd Avenue, New York City?
No, you're unlucky.
26 2nd Avenue, New York City, where the Krishna consciousness ISKCON started there. Prabhupada came at the age of 69 years of age. So it's a holy place. You should visit that place and pay our respects. So Maharaj actually belongs to a suburb of New York City, and actually one of the boroughs of New York City. He is in Brooklyn right now, Brooklyn ISKCON Temple. Radha Govindji, the wonderful Radha Govindji is there. And Maharaj is a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, as I stated. Maharaj has been to many different countries as a preacher. Maharaj has been to Vrindavan for a long time. And we are very fortunate to have him with us. So without further ado or delay, let's request Maharaj to enlighten us, and let's welcome Maharaj with loud Hari Bol.
Hari Bol. Hari Bol. Hari Bol.
Thank you, Maharaj. Hare Krishna. That's the next one. This is the next one.
Are there some kartals? Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jai Radha Gopi Java Bhakti Vriksha Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki.
Jai.
Granthra Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki.
Jai.
Samveda Bhakta Vrinda ki.
Jai.
Gaur Premanandi.
Haribol.
All glories to Samala devotees.
Jai.
All glories to Samala devotees.
Jai.
All glories to Samala devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Govinda. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kalamayam Dadati Swabhadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutampada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakamitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchan Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasani Gaur Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So I appreciate very much the opportunity to be able to speak to all of you down here in Reading, or is it Reading?
Reading.
Reading, most people pronounce it Reading, okay. I was thinking actually to talk a little bit from the Bhagavad Gita, but before I start talking, does anybody have any particular question about Krishna consciousness or anything in general? I always like to throw that out. Yeah.
Quick question, Prabhuji. So if I understand, when Lord Prabhupada came here and you started following him,
Uh-huh.
what was your belief before that, and what made you kind of get
Okay.
attracted towards Prabhupada and kind of convert?
Well, my parents were Christian, and I think they were good people. They definitely had a very strong desire to serve God in a certain way. As I grew up, becoming a teenager, I became interested in understanding something about the world around me. And when I asked questions, I found that basically there weren't many answers to those questions. And I felt that somehow or another there must be answers to basic questions, yeah.
What were those questions?
Well, I wondered about things like the nature of God. What was God really like? Was it just that there was one life and there was hell after it, or heaven, whatever the idea is? Could it be that only one religion is right and all the rest of them are wrong, and all those kind of things? Those were questions that I wondered about. And I felt that in general, there weren't really very solid answers to those questions. So I read a lot of books, and I was interested in philosophy. I read, books by Buddhists and books by yogis and books by all kinds of people. And often I felt that I could understand some of what they were saying, but at a certain point I felt like they kind of drifted off into some never land, and I just saw streams and streams of words that I couldn't make any sense out of at all. And so I thought, well, that's just because I'm just not very far advanced and I can't understand what they're talking about. And then if we fast forward some years later on, I was born in New York City, but my parents didn't live in New York City very long. They moved to Missouri, and I basically grew up there. And I went to school there, a couple of years of schooling in college at Missouri University. And then at a certain point I dropped out of college, and I wanted to see more what life was about before I committed to finishing up college and getting some kind of degree and getting involved in the regular workforce. So I left and I moved to, for a short while I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And while I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a devotee came and he made an explanation of the process of Krishna consciousness. And this was the first time that I'd ever heard the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. And a lot of things that he said made sense. And I thought, well, here's a philosophy that actually describes and answers a lot of basic questions. But at the same time, I knew that Krishna consciousness required a price, and that you had to give up illicit sex, gambling, intoxication, meat eating. And I wasn't ready to do that at that point in time. So although it sounded very good, I just kind of gave it a nod and moved on in my life. And then shortly thereafter I moved to California. And when I was in California, I went through a lot of episodes, and I felt that my life had no basic meaning. I think that was probably the best way to describe what was going on. There was nothing bad happening to me particularly, but I just felt that life had no meaning, and I couldn't figure out how to get some meaning in my life. And I tried meditation, I tried a bunch of different things, but it was in California, in San Francisco, that a friend of mine came up to visit, and he wanted to go to a Rath Yatra, and that Rath Yatra was in Golden Gate Park. And it happened to be that at that Rath Yatra was the one and only time I saw Srila Prabhupada, and at that time I had no idea who he was. I didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness other than a little bit about the philosophy that I'd heard maybe 2 or 3 years prior in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And I didn't really want to be at the Rath Yatra. A friend of mine wanted to go, so I went because I was the host and he was the guest, and I felt that was the proper thing to do. And so at that Rath Yatra, I heard Prabhupada speak. And again, it all sounded nice, but I wasn't ready quite yet. But a year later, I also went to that Rath Yatra, but this time not with my friend. And this time Prabhupada wasn't there, but a devotee was there, and he spoke. And shortly after that second time I went to the second Rath Yatra, I started to feel that life really was a mystery, and there was something very horrible missing in my life, and I didn't know what it was. And I felt I had to find out, and I had to find out soon. If I didn't find out soon, I didn't know what would happen. I just felt something ominous would happen, something very bad. And so I went to the temple, which at that time was in Berkeley, California. And when I came in, a devotee was giving Bhagavad Gita class. And suddenly it all just clicked in. I thought, this is it. This is what I should do. And I stayed for the Bhagavad Gita class. And then I asked if I could live in the temple for a short while to see what it was like to live in the temple. And after I had been there a couple of days, I was hoping that they wouldn't ask me to leave, and they didn't. So I was fortunate. I looked pretty wild, so they were taking a risk for sure. But I stayed from that point onward because I recognized that here was the real explanation of spiritual life. Here was something very deep. And here were answers to questions that I couldn't find anywhere else, about is there only one life? And if so, a lot of things don't make sense. Is there just eternal hell if one fails the test of life? If so, then God doesn't make sense. Is there just one religion and all other religions are wrong? If so, how do you find that religion? Is it just the luck of where you happen to be born? None of these things made any sense to me, but when I learned about Krishna consciousness, I could understand that here were the answers, that it isn't one life, but there are many lives, and that we are born as a result of our past activities. If we don't desire God, then quite likely we'll be born in a situation where we'll be in an environment that isn't very conducive to understanding about God. And similarly, if we do want to know about God, we'll be born in a situation where it is conducive. And that there isn't just one lifetime where you either make it forever or you blow it forever. That rather it's a process of developing love for God. And if you don't make it, as mentioned in Bhagavad Gita, that even if you, however much you achieve, that you will retain in the next life and you will pick up where you left off. And I began to understand that all religions are based on the concept of Sanatana Dharma, but some have a more complete picture of it, and some have a less complete picture of it, and some are more hampered by misconceptions, and some are less hampered by misconceptions. So that all began to make a lot of sense to me. And then I could understand that now here is the purpose of a hell or a heaven. It's a reward or a punishment for a bad lifetime or a good lifetime. And it's not eternal, because hell is there to give you a chance to suffer the way you've caused others to suffer. And now, once you've finished with that suffering, maybe you'll change your life. If hell is eternal, then there's no meaning to it. It just seems sadistic. There's no purpose to something if there's no chance for rectification afterwards. And of course, then I began to realize eventually too, that various religions in the world have their way of presenting themselves in a way to bring God close, but in the same token, there's an element of most religions that also keeps God away a certain degree. So they bring God close, but they also present somewhat of a barrier so that you don't get too close to God. And that's what we see, that many religions have made accommodations so that people can eat meat and engage in religious practice. Many religions have made accommodations that people can be very materialistic and still be considered quite advanced in their religious following. And, in general, religions have made a process of spiritual realization that is good in the sense that it organizes people to serve God and head towards God. But at the same time, there is some defect there that keeps people from actually understanding God completely. And if you study the history of religions, you begin to see that in their inception, most religions were quite complete in their desire to reach God fully. But as the centuries cross on, that religions tend to fade out, and a kind of cultural deadness comes in, and a kind of spiritual compromise gradually becomes more and more prominent, to the point where religions bring you so close but no closer to God. And that's what I began to understand. And then I had never read anything like Srimad Bhagavatam that describes the nature of the soul, how the soul journeys from one lifetime to another, how karma actually works, what we mean by yoga, how to control the mind, why we should control the mind. And I never encountered a process like chanting Hare Krishna. It literally saved my life. That if I had not learned about chanting Hare Krishna, my mind would have eaten me alive at an earlier point in my life. I would not be here today if I hadn't learned about chanting Hare Krishna. Because the mind, as we learn in Bhagavad Gita's 6th chapter, is the best friend or the worst enemy. And the worst part about the mind is you're never away from it. You carry it with you 24/7 wherever you go. And so if it's your worst enemy, you're with your worst enemy 24/7. And the only way to deal with that is to have a process for purifying that mind, and that is chanting Hare Krishna. So maybe that answers your question. Yeah, you have a question in the back. Hare Krishna. Are you a Parikshit?
Yes.
Oh, okay, Hare
Yeah,
Krishna.
sorry I came late. But
No.
I knew I was going to read because of what I had to do in the morning, but I still wanted to come.
Yeah.
I had a question. What you were saying, your experiences about the religion or the church, that they were talking about God, but there was some defect there that did not allow you to get close enough to God. My in-laws, my wife's family are Seventh-day Adventists. When we visit them, and it's a Saturday, they go to church, and we go. And my experience, when the preacher is preaching, I always get frustrated.
What's that?
I get frustrated,
You get frustrated.
although I don't show it. This is the church. And I wondered if and I'll describe my frustration. I wondered if you felt the same way in those, that setting whenever you were there. The preacher would speak something about God, but whatever he starts, because of knowing Krishna consciousness of Bhagavad Gita, there's so much more to it, but they never end it.
Yeah,
You don't get it, and then it goes somewhere else. And that is also short. And you go to talk about another topic, but it's also short. Everything they're saying, it's like, it's supposed to be 1 foot, but you hear about 3 inches of it.
Yeah.
And then the next 3 inches, and I'm sitting there, but there's more to it. How come the guy doesn't even know? But that's how I was feeling. I don't know whether you got that feeling ever.
No, I didn't get that feeling because at that time I didn't know Krishna consciousness.
Oh, okay.
All I knew is that
Okay, so you
I
felt
felt there must be more to the story, but I wasn't hearing it. I wasn't feeling frustrated. And, at a certain point there was a little bit of a doubt even, well, maybe nobody knows this, But this is the famous sagging microphone. Yeah, I think it should go in.
No.
Okay, don't break it.
You can do it.
All right, I think we'll see if it sags after this one. The idea is that I think people are very sincere, and I do believe, and what's interesting is that in 11th canto, what is it, 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it's 11th canto, 11:33, that Krishna says, someone may not know exactly who I am or how I exist, but if they are serving me, they are my devotee. It's a very interesting verse. I'll read it exactly here since I've got it just by happenstance. Gyatva gyatavata ye vaimam yavanyas chasmi adrishaha bhajanti ananya bhavena tame bhaktat tama mataha. My devotees may or may not know exactly what I am, who I am, or how I exist. But if they worship me with unalloyed, I can think of about maybe 10, usually when I start thinking about it, it becomes more like 20, basic miscomprehensions and short comprehensions, like you were saying, of important principles that are put forward in most religious systems. We know, for instance, that what love of God really is means, ahoitikia pratiyata. One has to be unmotivated and uninterrupted in service. Now, that's completely off the charts as far as most other religious organizations go. For the most part, most religious organizations cultivate what I call football team mentality for their followers, that I belong to the team. Everybody on the team is yeah, rah, rah, great. And everybody on the other team is boo, sis, and all that kind of thing. And so our team is good, all other teams are bad. And that's all there is to it. There's no other thing about it. If you're on the other team, you're wearing the other colors, you're bad. And if you're on our team, you're good. It doesn't matter what you do. If you're on our team, it doesn't matter what you do if you're on their team. And that's a very kind of shallow understanding of spiritual life. And what we find is that as religions have progressed, generally, I call it the snowball of culture, or the snowball of tradition. Tradition is a good thing. In fact, all spiritual knowledge comes wrapped in some cultural or traditional clothing. It's impossible to get just raw philosophy practically. You get it wrapped in a cultural and traditional dress of some kind or another. But as the years cross on, we find that the culture adds things. There's an accretation, or things get added to the snowball as it rolls down the hill. And some of those things are things that actually genuinely help to understand the spiritual philosophy underneath and to practice the spiritual guidelines that are a part of the spiritual philosophy. Some things are neither here nor there. They don't really help, they don't really hinder either. And some things help some people and they harm other people. They help in some places, some people, to make more rapid progress, and in other places, at other times, they actually hamper some people. And some things actually are completely the wrong way. They get added as religious traditions, but they're actually completely contrary to the real soul of the religion. And so as the centuries or years go by, if the people who are managing that religious tradition don't clip away those things that are actually inhibiting spiritual life, if they don't recognize what's good and emphasize that, if they don't recognize that for some people, in some places this is good, but for other people in other places this is bad, we should stop it. If they don't make those distinctions, then gradually the snowball of religious tradition becomes overcrowded with unnecessary things that are actually beside the point. And those things that are important and essential get reduced to being trivial and actually eventually eliminated. And that's why religions tend to become hollow ritualistic shells as the years cross on. People remember the ritual, they remember the tradition, they remember the language, they remember the clothing, but they don't remember the purpose of the religion. And so we have something called Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So we have the actual scriptures. We have not only the Guru that tells us how to understand those scriptures, but we also have that the Guru isn't hanging in outer space on a thread by himself. There are others who have a similar understanding as him, and not only in the present time, but 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, we have people who understood things in the same way. And they were wrestling with exactly these same issues, to allow the tradition to go forward, keeping the essential things and those things which help people to understand and execute the essential things, and clipping away those unnecessary and diverting things that are actually either pushing important things down to a lower importance, or even completely giving people the wrong interpretation, the wrong understanding. And so that's what's happened with modern religion for the most part. I was talking about the other day that with Christianity, originally Christianity started out with a great deal of enthusiasm, and basically it was a do-or-die philosophy where people gave up everything and put themselves out on a limb and tried to live the way Christ lived. But over time, they first of all ejected the idea of reincarnation, which happened around the middle of the 6th century. It came up. There was a Christian philosopher whose name was Origen who taught reincarnation. And his ideas came to be known in the general Christian circles, and they wanted to discover whether this was actually acceptable Christian philosophy or not. And although in the western half of the Roman Empire, it was basically being taught, in the eastern half of the Roman Empire, in other words, in Byzantium, or what would later be called Byzantium, it was not accepted, and it eventually came when it was voted out, that reincarnation is not a part of Christian philosophy. And of course, we have the idea that in the early church there were vegetarian Christians, and they understood that they shouldn't be eating animals and so on and so forth. But again, later on, they tried to discover whether this should be something we should keep or throw out. They decided to throw it out. And as you throw these things out, you are left with serious philosophical problems. When you get rid of reincarnation, then you can't explain God in a sensible way. And when you can't explain God in a sensible way, then you have to resort to what becomes called dogma. You say, it's like this, don't ask why, this is the way it is, there's no more to it, and that's it. And when you explain spiritual life in that manner, people become intellectually handicapped. They can't actually explore the concept of what and who God is, because they learn that God is the way that the minister tells them God is, and it doesn't exactly make sense, but they're not allowed to ask questions about it, and they're not allowed to try to understand it. So as a result, they become handicapped in that way, and that leads to a very superficial grasp of spiritual life. And as I was saying yesterday, the problem is we're surrounded by an ocean of bad examples, and we're surrounded by an ocean of bad philosophy. So if we don't have actually solid philosophy to back us up, there's a tendency just to go with the herd. We just tend to follow what everybody else is doing, because it's what we see everybody doing. All the lemmings are running together. We don't really know that they're running off a cliff. Because everybody else is running, we start to run with them in the same direction. Eventually, the leaders of the herd fall off, and they fall off the cliff, and everybody else follows them too. So, this is unfortunately why, religion has a bad name. It's also unfortunately why people are very narrow-minded in their religious conceptions, and many people cannot be reached for this very reason, because they have kind of recognized subconsciously that if they investigate their religion philosophically, it may fall apart. And they're terrified that that might happen. So they do not do that. And if somebody starts talking to them about another religious philosophy, there reaches a point where they begin to shut the person down. And they have to kind of speak very strongly and very arrogantly and very unintelligently, because they can't actually absorb the ideas that are coming the other way. They just have to basically shout them down. And it happens time and time and time and time again. So that's why basically as a minister, I try to find those people who are a little open, and I talk to them. Those people who I know are shut, I don't talk to them, and I let them go about their business. But this is, of course, I felt there must be something more to it. And after reading a lot of things, I didn't know which way to turn. But finally, when I heard the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, the way Prabhupada presents it, it was so complete. And it answered all those questions about other religions, about different lifetimes, about heaven, about hell, what and who is God, what is he doing? And the most mysterious question that nobody ever asks, why are we persons? I mean, what's the purpose of our personality? We are people, and we're different. We have personalities. Why is it like that? What's the purpose of it? Nobody ever asks or answers that question. I didn't even know that question at the time, but more recently I've become aware that this is a very essential question, and nobody ever asks it, and nobody ever answers it. Of course, Krishna consciousness is the answer for it, because we learn that persons are there to have relationships with the Supreme Person, Krishna. And if we have a relationship with the Supreme Person, Krishna, that relationship can be in love, and it will be in various kinds of rasas. And that's what the whole world is destined to do, what it's really about. Especially the spiritual world. The spiritual world is designed as a big stage for Krishna to carry out pastimes with various different devotees in different rasas. And he kind of juggles the rasas back and forth. He's with one group, and he's with another group, and he's with another group. And in this way, he keeps things interesting and energized, and he keeps things fresh and new, and there's something happening all the time. And we have a purpose for our personality. We're doing something with it. It isn't a handicap or something that we will gradually learn how to dissolve away, as the Mayavadis would have us think. It's something that's very essential. Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
So, once I thought, okay, I'll teach, or I bought a comics kind of book, and I tried teaching, let's say, Mahabharata to my daughter.
Mm.
But as I was, and again, it was a concentrated, small book which had summary of a lot of different things. But as I was turning pages, the only thing I could see was, this person was killed, and the next this person was killed, and then Krishna killed this person, and that person, somebody wanted to kill Krishna, and then Krishna advised somebody to kill somebody else. So the whole
Book is all about killing.
it was like endless killing actually.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt like, how can I even? Because I'm trying to tell a story to my child in the evening, and I decided, okay, I'll pick up this book of Mahabharata. It's like right from start to the end, it was about killing. So.
Oh, you could read Krishna book. It has all the stories about it.
So
But, the Mahabharata is like that because, as we know in Bhagavad Gita, that Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata bhutanam dharmasya tadamanam shujamayaham parchanaya sadhunam vinashya chaduskritam dharma samstapanartaya sambhavami yuge yuge. That I come to annihilate the demons and to give pleasure to the devotees and to reestablish religion. And so, in this case, that's what predominancy of Mahabharata is all about. It was Krishna removing the demonic elements from the world and establishing the devotees in a way that they are not hampered or harassed by demoniac elements. At the time that Krishna came, we have the whole idea that Mother Bhumi Devi was totally overburdened with what are usually called unnecessary military forces on the world. What that meant was that the demons, they wanted to conquer the heavenly worlds. And they do that periodically. And just like in the modern day, when you have two countries that are potentially at war with one another, if you can get a piece of land that's close to the enemy's border, then that's very good for you. It's a good strategic stronghold. So between the heavenly worlds and the subterranean heavenly planets where the demons live. Between those two is the earth. So we're that neutral country in between that is neither as powerful as the demigods nor as powerful as the demons. So we're that kind of unfortunate little third world planet in between heaven and the subterranean heavenly worlds that gets the staging point for the demons' attack. And so they had already been amassing for many years, and they were preparing to attack the demigods. The demigods knew it, and Bhumi Devi knew it, and she went to ask the Supreme Lord for help. And the Supreme Lord said, yes, I will come and I will eliminate these unnecessary demoniac forces. And then Krishna agreed to appear. And when he appeared, even as a baby, he was, he killed Putana witch, first demon that Krishna eliminates from the world is Putana witch. And then there's one after the other. You have, all the other ones. Agasura, Keshi, you have Bakasura, and so many other demons that Krishna kills as a child. And then later on he kills Kamsa. And then, he becomes attacked by Jarasandha and by Kaliyavana. And then, he has to fight them and other bellicose kings. Finally Krishna moves to Dwarka because he doesn't want to cause, like, what you're thinking about. He didn't want the poor residents of Vrindavan to be on the border of all this warfare going on constantly. So he thought, Mathura is too close to Vrindavan, and there's a chance that one of these demons that comes to attack me in Mathura will cause some problem for those people in Vrindavan, so I should move away from here. And he moves to Dwarka, which is far away from Vrindavan, and therefore he's able to fight the demons out there in Dwarka. And so when Krishna is finished with it all, he realizes that there's still a lot of demons out there, so Krishna creates the Battle of Kurukshetra, and that kind of wipes out enormous, huge other quantity of various demoniac entities. And then there's still one group of very powerful people left, and that isn't the demons, but it's actually the Yadu dynasty. And Krishna has to figure out, how do I remove these folks from the planet? Because if I go back to the spiritual world and the Yadu dynasty is still on planet Earth, then they can create problems too. So we created the event where the Yadu dynasty annihilates itself by this fratricidal war, where they start calling names of each other, and pretty soon they take these canes and they're killing each other. And so when the Yadu dynasty is finally annihilated, then Krishna finally decides at that point, well, it looks like mostly all the demons are gone, and it's time for me to finish my pastimes, and Krishna leaves. So the reason, of course, is that in the material world there will always be a mixture of demigods and demons in this world. There will always be people who want spiritual life and people who don't want it. And because of the nature of the material world, sometimes those who do not want spiritual life will be the rulers of the world, and those who do want spiritual life will be oppressed. And sometimes it'll be the other way around, that those who do want spiritual life will be the rulers, and those who are demonic will feel that they're oppressed, and it goes back and forth. It's never solidly one way or the other, but that's the nature of the material world, that it's always sometimes one way and sometimes the other way. And so in the Mahabharata there's all this warfare because there's all this unnecessary demoniac ruling over people who are actually simply desiring spiritual life, and they're being oppressed. So Krishna comes to liberate that oppression. That's why he kills all these various demons. But if you really want to avoid having so much warfare in what you read to your children, then read Krishna book. It's got all the stories. Still Krishna's killing demons, but it's kind of funny there because he's a kid too. And Krishna's killing various demons, but he's also playing with his friends and doing things that are quite interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
everyone shuns the materialistic world, if let's suppose everyone in the world shuns away the materialistic world, then how will they exhibit their creativity and how will the life continues?
How will what happen?
How would the life continue?
Before that.
How would they exhibit their creativity?
Yeah, exhibit their creativity, right. That's a good question. First of all, it's an impossible situation. Yesterday we were talking about Advaitacharya, because Wednesday will be the appearance day of Advaitacharya. And so we found out that Advaitacharya is actually Mahavishnu and Sadashiva in one. Sadashiva comes and he worships for 700 years Mahavishnu. And Mahavishnu says, my dear Sadashiva, don't you know we are one? Why are you worshipping me? What have you come for? And Sadashiva says, I wish that the people of Kali Yuga be delivered somehow or other. So please give me the potency that I can help deliver the Kali Yuga. And Vishnu says, yes, we can go together. And Sadashiva and Mahavishnu become one, and they take birth as Advaitacharya. But as they decide that, Yamaraj comes on the scene. I didn't tell this yesterday, but Yamaraj comes on the scene. He says, wait a minute. I'm the ruler of hell. What happens if nobody comes to hell? Do I have to shut the place down or what? and to that, Mahavishnu and Sadashiva replied, don't worry, Yamaraj. There will be always atheists, unbelievers, materialists, and people who have no desire for spiritual life, and you will have plenty of business, don't worry. So the issue is that as people perfect their lives and leave this material universe for the spiritual world, because ultimately that's the goal of Krishna consciousness, we are trying to perfect our lives and leave the material world altogether and not take another birth here and go to the spiritual world. And the spiritual world's not a cloud, it's not a dead stone. It's a place where people are doing things, a lot of things, and they're very colorful things, and there are even more there are more sensations there than there are here. But once we leave it, we're off the radar map of the material world. However, there are new people coming from the spiritual world, so there's constantly a flow through. And that's why, although it wouldn't be the most misfortunate thing in the world, Yamaraj is never out of any business. He's always got candidates for, or we should say clients for his particular administration down there in the hellish worlds. There's always people ready for Yamaraj's administration. So the material world, we see that in Satya Yuga, essentially, most people did not try for any kind of material activity. So we would call that, from a technological point of view, a backward civilization. From a spiritual point of view, it's a progressive situation because people are not over extended and lost in a civilization that tries to maintain very difficult technological organizational and technological systems. That's what I'm trying to search for. Technological systems that are very difficult to maintain. So in our modern life, we don't even have to hear it said. The whole material universe is preaching to us that yes, just become more technologically competent, increase your material possessions, become elevated in your occupational status, and you will be happy. That's what we hear preached all around us, even if nobody says it. Our whole culture is based on that theme. Material prosperity is the only thing that matters, and how we get material prosperity is by increasing our income, by raising in the ranks of our occupational hierarchy, and then we get a bigger salary, And with a bigger salary, naturally, we can have more material facilities. If we have more material facilities, then everything will be satisfied by that. But we see it's a lie. It doesn't work. That as people become more and more involved in rising the corporate ladder, in making bigger income, in having more material facilities, there's more for them to manage. And actually, they stand to lose more. And their consciousness becomes more and more absorbed in materialistic affairs. And nobody notices this, that a man can have 2 Ferraris and never have time to even drive one of them, you know. That a person can have a huge home, then he has to hire a whole team of management personnel to keep it clean and do all this kind of stuff. And therefore, every time we add some new dimension to our material facility, we also add a dimension of material administration that we have to be in charge of at some level. And in this way we waste our lives. So Bhagavatam rather tells us, kamasya anendriya pratir labho jiveta yavata jivasya tattva jigyasya narto yas cheha karma bihi. That life's desires should never be aimed at sense gratification. Rather, one should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation. Because a human being is designed for self-realization, nothing else should be the goal of one's work. And that's Bhagavatam 1.2.10 or 1.2.9, one of those, you know. And that's actually what we're saying. We're not doing away with technology, and we're not doing away with work. That was Arjuna's problem in Bhagavad Gita. He thought Krishna wanted him to stop working, which Krishna, in no uncertain terms, told him that wasn't what he was suggesting. So we aren't stopping to work. We aren't throwing away technology. But what we are doing is keeping our priorities straight. That our priority is to understand spiritual life and to serve Krishna. And to that extent, we may have a reasonable facility for living, reasonable food, and reasonable clothing. All these things are not undue. But when we allow these things to be the real target of our desires, the real focus of our actions, then we're in trouble. Because we will spend our lives doing what everybody else does. This, man dying with his hand outstretched, just about to grab a dollar bill, that basic image that our society gives us, that we should struggle as much as possible to get material wealth. And of course, if people did in mass become spiritually aware and spiritually conscious, certainly the economy would slow down, there's no doubt about it. But that would not exactly be a disaster. What would happen would be that the economy might actually come to the situation where people are able to live without spending 98% of their human energy just trying to make ends meet. That people would recognize that life has something more than just being a consumer on one side and being a producer on the other side. So we work for somebody and we're a producer, and then we're a consumer on the other side. We go to Kmart or whatever it is and buy whatever we need, and that's life for most people.
So as I understand, it's just a passage. Your goal, attaining the spirituality is it's a long way.
Yeah.
So there are always some goals which you need to accomplish and then move to a further goal.
Yeah.
So whatever goal you're working on, that is your spiritual life. That's what I understand.
Well, yeah, goals should be very carefully evaluated, because a goal can be spiritual in its essence, or it can be very material. What's the difference between, we see devotees driving around and buying stuff for a program and organizing things and spending money, and they may buy things, they may look on the internet to see what the best price is, they may be checking out, and then we have somebody in the next house who's also checking the internet, finding out the best price, driving around, having a program where his friends are going to get together, drink beer, and watch a football game, the Super Bowl or whatever it is. And what's the difference? The answer is that one of the groups is actually focused on trying to understand Krishna and to explain about Krishna, whereas the other group is not focused on that at all. they appear to be doing the same things. They're all both driving cars, they're both looking on the internet, they're both trying to find the best prices, they're both organized that somehow it's designed to be a position, environment that we can learn about Krishna, hear about Krishna, and glorify Krishna. Whereas the other is designing an environment which is to forget about Krishna and to do something completely different. So it's not the work, and it's not the effort, and it's not the methods, it's the attitude or the ultimate purpose of what we're doing that demarcates whether something is actually spiritual or material. Right, I hope that's...
Yes, it explains my question.
So maybe we'll briefly talk about what I hadn't planned to talk about. I'm happy that it went this way. It's better, actually. In the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Shri Bhagavana Vacha, Maya Vesha Mano Parata Yogan Yunjan Manashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gyasashi Tach Trinu. That's a kind of tongue twister. It's the first verse of chapter 7. Maya Asakta Manaparta Yogam Yunjan Manashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gyasyasi Tach Trinu. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. Now, this is one of the few verses, I'll read it again. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Now hear, O son of Pritha, how by practicing yoga in full consciousness of me, with mind attached to me, you can know me in full, free from doubt. So, if you look in the Veda base, you'll find that Prabhupada speaks on this verse more than he speaks on any other verse in Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada used this verse as a kind of platform for speaking the basics or the crux of Vaishnava philosophy. Because in the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is speaking to Arjuna, but he's mentioning all kinds of things. He's mentioning Sankhya Yoga, he's mentioning Karma Yoga, he's mentioning Jnana Yoga, he's mentioning Dhyana Yoga, and so on and so forth. He's mentioning all these Vedic processes, and one can think, in fact many people actually say, that Krishna is offering Arjuna all kinds of possibilities, but that's in fact not true. At the end of 6th chapter, Krishna finally hones in what he really wants Arjuna to do. So, the last 2 verses in chapter 6, they make a point of what Krishna wants. First verse is tapas vibhyo diko yogi jnanibhyo pimato dikaha karmibhyas chadiko yogi tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, the yogi is better than the ascetic, greater than the empiricist, greater than the fruitive worker, therefore, O Arjuna, in all circumstances be a yogi. Now, what does he mean by being a yogi? In the next verse, Krishna explains what he means by being a yogi. And he says, Yoginam api sarvesham madgatenam taratmanam shadavam bhajate yamam sameyuktatamomataha. And of all yogis, one with great faith, who always abides in me, thinks of me within himself, and renders transcendental loving service to me. He is the most intimately united with me in yoga and is the highest of all. That is my opinion. So then Krishna is describing the kind of yogi he wants Arjuna to be is a bhakti yogi, one who always thinks of him, renders transcendental loving service, is intimate with him. This is the definition of the kind of yogi that he wants Arjuna to be. Now that ends chapter 6 and 7, the first verse we just read it. Shri Bhagavana Vacha, Mai Asakta Mano Parta Yogan Yunjan Manashraya Asamshayam Samagram Mam Yata Gyasyasi Touch Trinu. The first verse of chapter 7. So now, with chapter 7, Krishna begins to describe what he really means by Bhakti Yoga. So, up to chapter 6, Krishna is describing many different Vedic paths. And the reason he's describing them is so he can get himself and Arjuna on the same page. You know, Arjuna has heard many different Vedic formulas. Why? Because Arjuna grew up in the forest with his father, Pandu. Pandu was not a stay-at-home kind of guy. He wanted to be out in the field, out in the forest where the sages were. He wanted to be out in the kingdom. He didn't like being in the palace. So when he was out, naturally, the Pandavas as little boys, they were surrounded by sages in the forest, and they heard all these Vedic things. And like everybody else, when you hear a lot of Vedic things, you get this really, really scrambled picture of what it is the Vedas really want us to do. Because you can read over here, we're reading about some sacrifice to the sun god or to Agni, or some sacrifice over here from the four Vedas. We hear over here people doing yoga. Over here we hear about people performing some ritual, fasting, or people who are mortifying their body by standing on one leg. Or we hear about the process of jnana, where people are reading things and using nyaya or logic to dissect what they're reading. And so we think, well, what am I really supposed to do? I can't do all these things. I have to choose. And it's not clear. But Krishna makes it clear that really these other things are lesser paths. The real business of someone who wants to become close to Krishna is to become a bhakti yogi. And so after he's discussed all these things in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, then Krishna finally tells Arjuna, this is what I really want you to do. I want you're better than the tapasvi, tapasvibhyo diko yogi. The yoga is better than the tapasvi. Jnanibhyo, jnanibhyo pi mataha, what is it? Jnanibhyo pi mato dikaha, that's what it is. Jnanibhyo pi mato dikaha. So you're better than the jnani, the yogi is better than the jnani. Karmibhyas, chadiko yogi. So the yogi is better than the karmi. So he's summing up all the things he's talked about in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And now he's saying, Tasmad yogi bhavarjuna. Therefore, Arjuna, you become a yogi. And then he explains what kind of yogi in this next verse, So now, when he starts talking about devotional service, Arjuna won't be raising his hand and saying, but Bhagavan, what about karma? Krishna's already talked about it. He won't say, but Bhagavan, what about yoga practice? Shouldn't I be meditating? Krishna says, I already talked about it. He won't be raising his hand saying these things because Krishna has already talked about them. And now he can start talking about bhakti yoga, and Arjuna is going to recognize we've already talked about the other stuff. Now we're talking about what's important. Forget the other stuff. And that's why with this verse, Prabhupada used this verse as kind of an open platform to begin to describe what Krishna consciousness is in a nutshell. What is it? And so what's interesting about Krishna consciousness is if you read Bhagavad Gita, and you all should be reading Bhagavad Gita. I guess you're doing a regular Bhagavad Gita class here every Sunday.
We have a regular material that is based on Gita and Bhagavad.
I see. Okay. So, when you read Bhagavad Gita or Bhagavatam, you will begin to realize that Krishna consciousness is described in a number of very different ways. And that may seem confusing at first, because sometimes we describe Krishna consciousness as becoming free from material desire. We've all heard that. One wants to progress in Krishna consciousness, has to become free from material desire. Sometimes we describe Krishna consciousness as rising above the three modes. There's rajas, tamas, and sattva. So we want to rise to sattva and rise above rajas and tamas. Sometimes we hear that Krishna consciousness is controlling the mind. Sometimes we hear that Krishna consciousness is controlling the senses. Sometimes we hear that Krishna consciousness is yoga. So these things may sound like contradictions, but these are the same thing in different dress. In other words, we're talking about the same thing, but we're talking about it using different pictures and different words, because sometimes it's easier to understand one version of it than it is to understand the other version of it. But we're actually talking about the same thing. Krishna is not talking about different processes. He's just talking about the same process, using different metaphors or different kinds of language to talk about it. So this should not actually confuse us, because if we become lifted above the modes, that's the same thing as getting free from our material desires. It's the same thing as actually controlling the mind. It's the same thing as developing love for God. These are all just different ways to say the same thing. And so sometimes, because of what Krishna is trying to get across, the point, it's easier to talk about Krishna as a yoga, or talk about Krishna consciousness as a kind of rising above the modes, or as a kind of mind control, which he does in 6th chapter, or as a kind of control of the senses. So just bear in mind that Krishna consciousness can be described in any one of these ways. And then I'll read briefly what Prabhupada says in the purport here. Purport: in the 7th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the nature of Krishna consciousness is fully described. Krishna is full in all opulences, and how he manifests such opulences is described herein. Also, 4 kinds of fortunate people who become attracted or attached to Krishna, and 4 kinds of unfortunate people who never take to Krishna are described in this chapter. That's later in chapter 7. In the first 6 chapters of Bhagavad Gita, the living entity has been described as non-material spirit soul, capable of elevating himself to self-realization by different types of yogas. So that's what we just talked about. At the end of 6th chapter, it has been clearly stated that the steady concentration of the mind upon Krishna, or in other words, Krishna consciousness, is the highest form of yoga. By concentrating one's mind on Krishna, one is able to know the absolute truth completely, but not otherwise. Impersonal Brahmajyoti, or localized Paramatma realization, is not perfect knowledge of the absolute truth, because it is partial. Full and scientific knowledge is Krishna, and everything is revealed to the person in Krishna consciousness. In complete Krishna consciousness, one knows that Krishna is the ultimate knowledge beyond any doubts. Different types of yogas are only stepping stones on the path to Krishna consciousness. One who takes directly to Krishna consciousness automatically knows about Brahmajyoti and Paramatma in full. By practice of Krishna conscious yoga, one can know everything in full, namely the absolute truth, the living entities, the material nature, and their manifestations with paraphernalia. One should therefore begin yoga practice as directed in the last verse of 6th chapter. Concentration of the mind upon Krishna, the Supreme, is made possible by prescribed devotional service in 9 different forms, of which Shravana is the most important. The Lord therefore says to Arjuna, touch Shrinu, or hear from me. No one is a greater authority than Krishna, and therefore, by hearing from him, one receives the greatest opportunity to become perfectly a Krishna-conscious person. One has therefore to learn from Krishna directly, or from a pure devotee of Krishna, and not from a non-devotee upstart, puffed up with academic education. In Srimad Bhagavatam, this process of understanding Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Absolute Truth, is described in the 2nd chapter of the 1st canto as follows. Shrinvata svakata Krishna punya shravana kirtanam hridyantasto hi bhadrani vidhunoti suhritsatam nasta prayeshu bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati tama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki Tadarajastamo bhava kama lobhadayaschaye cheta etar avidham anavidham stitam sattve prasidati evam prasanna manaso bhagavan bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva jnanam mukta sangasya jayate vidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarva samshayaha Kshiyante kshasya karmani drashta evat manishvare. To hear about the Krishna from Vedic literatures or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as the best wishing friend and purifies devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from Bhagavatam and from devotees, he becomes fixed in devotional service of the Lord. By development of devotional service, one becomes free from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Thus Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of asamshaya samagram, which is, of course, in Sanskrit that means one knows Krishna without doubting and completely. That's what asamshaya means, without doubt, and samagra means completely. Thus Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of asamshaya samagram, understanding of the supreme absolute truth, personality of Godhead. So that's Bhagavatam 1:17 through 21. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. And that's the end of the purport. Anybody have any questions about that?
Mahabharat war took place in 18 days, right?
Yeah, in 18 days.
The Bhagavad Gita, how many days Krishna told to us?
Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita in probably about 30 minutes or 40 minutes, something like that. So it was just before the battle happened. We're going through Bhagavad Gita in slow motion.
Because talking to some of my friends who don't believe in Krishna consciousness. So how can we increase the awareness? Or how can we make them to understand and believe?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm constantly confronted with that question myself. One of the most important things to, I think, recognize first off is that not everybody wants to take part in spiritual life. When you're cooking, you have a green mango, and you don't use a green mango cooking unless you're making achar or something like that. So usually you leave the green mango on the tree, but the red or the yellow mango, you take that you can eat. It's ripe. So some people are not ripe. They do not want spiritual life, and anything you do to try to influence them will probably have a negative effect. You know, it's kind of like they say in America, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make the horse drink. You know, so you can you can make a situation that's conducive, but ultimately the person has to actually want Krishna consciousness. And in general, I have seen it, and Prabhupada says it in Bhagavad Gita, that as long as a person is convinced that material you just can't be interested in it, because you think, what are these fools talking about? They're wasting so much time when I could be using today to gear up to go to my next job position. I could be looking for a more highly paying job. I could be moving my money around from one kind of investment to another. All this time I'm wasting on this, talking about spiritual life, bogus stuff, when I could be making material progress, all this time. And that's the way it is. As long as a person is really, really convinced that material life is a possibility, that one can be happy with material things, then usually they're dead in the water as far as spiritual life goes. No matter what you say, nothing will influence them. However, having said that, here's the other side of the picture, that Krishna can do anything. But the question is, why will Krishna do anything? And the answer is that as devotees, we can influence other people through Krishna. It's kind of like GPS or something like that, or a satellite message. We send the phone message up to the satellite, and the satellite bounces it down to somebody else. So in this case, Krishna is like the satellite, and we are praying for somebody else's spiritual progress. Now, they may not care about their spiritual progress. And Krishna says, Yeya tam mam prapajante tam statai vibhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartate manusya parta sarvashaha. As they surrender to me, I reward them accordingly. So if somebody's not surrendering, Krishna rewards them accordingly. Zero revelation. So you have zero surrender equals zero revelation on the other side of the coin. So Krishna's not going to step in and force himself on somebody who doesn't want him. And if someone's very materialistically oriented, they certainly don't want him. So not much hope for a person like that. However, if the devotee says, please Krishna, you open the gate and dump some extra mercy on this person, and then Krishna may do it because you've asked for it, not because they've asked for it, but because you have asked for it. And then Krishna could change something in their lives. And this happens all the time too, not so much, but it does happen, that Krishna creates some circumstance in somebody's life that completely changes their view of the world. You can't do it, but Krishna can do it. Krishna's not going to do it if you don't ask, because that person doesn't want it. And Krishna's not going to do it because Krishna has given us free will, and he doesn't mess with our little, version of reality. If we want to have a very impoverished version of reality, we want to live in a material bubble and go through that lifetime after lifetime, Krishna won't force himself. But if as a devotee we pray for the benefit of some other person, then Krishna may give them mercy, otherwise they would not have gotten, and that mercy may actually change their consciousness. So that's also there. So two things, we try to look for not green mangoes, but ripe mangoes. And if we do work with somebody, or they're a relative or someone like that, that we really wish somehow would take to spiritual life, then that's the possibility, is pray for them. And don't agitate them by trying to make them interested in something that they're not interested in until they come forward. Okay, so looks like there are no questions, unless somebody's going to come up with a question really fast. Yeah.
I have a question. Like you gave the example of the ripe mango and the green mango, the unripe ones. Now, sometimes we have the unripe mango in the house because it's already cut off from the tree, and we give the little warmth and stuff like that, so it becomes ripe.
Right.
So how we can do that in a Krishna consciousness, because there are some unripe mangoes, or partially ripe mangoes.
Right. And that's why I mentioned just before, we can pray for somebody. And of course, we can act in such a way, if we ourselves are very focused on Krishna consciousness, then we will have a manner about us, and we will have an effect on people anyway, and people may become interested. Why is this person like that? But if we're living with people, then, usually people we live with very closely, they, they form a very two-dimensional view. People who live close together, usually they form a two-dimensional view of each other after some time because of repeated association. So that's why the important thing is to pray for others. If you're actually praying for their spiritual upliftment, you don't know what shape it will take, but Krishna does, each one of us have some impediment to Krishna consciousness, and it looks different in each person. And, oftentimes there's no direct way that one person can affect another person. If someone comes to me and says, "Oh, Maharaj, I have a problem, can you tell me what to do?" then it's like they're asking me to help them, and what I say may affect them. But oftentimes it's not like that. People aren't coming to us and asking us for some advice. They don't want advice. If we give them advice, they're just going to reject it. They're going to say, "Who are you? Go something or another." But if we pray for Krishna to help them, then Krishna may do something, and he does. I think that oftentimes people feel that prayer is something that only Christians do or something like that, but actually we have 9 forms of devotional service: Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, which is prayer. So we're praying to Krishna, not only offering glorificational prayers of Krishna, people do that, offering regular everyday prayers that we do in Kirtan and in our course of our regular programs, but we can offer special prayers for individual people. And if you really care about somebody and you want them to make spiritual advancement, don't tell them, but tell Krishna. And pray for them over and over again. And Krishna will do something, because now he has a reason to do something. That person isn't asking for help, but you are. And Krishna will do something to help them. And you can watch to see what happens over time and see if there's some aspect that you can do to help. But wait for some indication from Krishna. And that's why I say that's the best way to help. You won't agitate anybody that way, because they won't even know you're doing it. But Krishna knows that you're doing it, and that's what matters, actually. And the most important thing there is you're starting to develop a sense of compassion. When you get in the habit of praying for other people, you recognize that you are putting somebody else's welfare in a very important position in your life. You are taking the time for them in the only way that makes sense in many cases. The only way that makes sense to help many people is to pray for their betterment. And if you pray for their betterment, then Krishna will help them, and you will see it in some kind of way. And at the same time, your own heart will be purified, because you will be beginning to want to help other people, and that's what devotees are supposed to do. They're supposed to be paradukha-dukhi. They're supposed to actually want to help other people. Well, oftentimes we try to help people in the wrong way, but this is the right way to help other people. Yes.
Maharaj, coming back to the right category,
Yeah.
how can we, if we think we are trying to serve Krishna and trying to become devotees, how can we keep on that path progressing, not thinking much about the unripe category? We can pray and do, but parallelly, how can we ourselves progress? We are like a group of devotees who have recently getting introduced to this path.
Well, Krishna consciousness is simple. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Apinividenam, Iti Pumsarpita Vishnu Bhaktas Chen Navalakshana Kriyati Bhagavati Adhav Tanmanye Dihitam Uttamam. That's 7th canto, but Prahlad Maharaj is describing the 9 processes of devotional service. So somebody tell me, what's the first process of devotional service? Shravanam. What's process 2?
Kirtanam.
What is that?
Chanting.
Chanting. What's the 3rd process?
Remember.
Yeah, Vishnu Smaranam. Remembering Vishnu. What's the 4th process? Padasevan, what's
Serving,
that?
serving Krishna.
Serving feet. Whose feet? In this case, we mean particular feet.
Krishna.
Krishna's feet, okay, serving Krishna's lotus feet, Padasevana. What's the next one?
Archana. Archana.
Archana. What's Archana?
Deity worship.
Worship.
Yeah, worshiping the deity. Archana.
Arti.
What's that?
Arti.
Yeah, deity worship. And of course also when somebody's chanting Krishna and dancing in front of deities, that's also Archanam. And what's the next one after that?
Vandanam.
Vandanam. And what's that?
Prayer.
Yeah, what we were just talking about, Vandanam. And then what's after Vandanam?
Atmanivedanam.
What's that?
Atmanivedanam.
Yeah, no, there's one before Atmanivedanam.
Sakyam.
Sakyam, what's that?
Krishna's friend.
Yeah, becoming a friend of Krishna. These are exalted forms of devotional service. Actually, there's one before that. We skipped another one.
Archanam. Vandanam.
Anybody remember which one we skipped?
Archanam. Vandanam.
Dasyam.
Dasya.
Dasyam Sakyam
Becoming a servant, then Sakyam, becoming a friend.
Dasyam Sakyam.
And then Atmanivadana, giving up everything for Krishna. So basically, Krishna consciousness is we're moving always between these different 9 things. For the most part, we're moving between 6 things, because Dasyam, Sakyam, and Atmanivadam are high forms of devotional service. But we are always either Shravanaming, Kirtanaming, Vishnu Smaranaming, or Padasevaning. We're doing one of those 6 forms, So when we're making some prasad, we're cleaning, we're chanting Hare Krishna, we're hearing lecture, we are listening to bhajans, we are figuring out how to organize a program, we are arranging things for a program, we are giving money to support a program, we're going out and buying things for a program. All these things are various aspects of these 6 processes. And especially if we take very serious the process of chanting, because chanting is not just one of the processes. Chanting is the Yuga Dharma. It is the most essential of all the processes of Krishna consciousness because it directly cleanses the heart. And if we're hearing Krishna's name and we do it on a scheduled basis every day, then our consciousness is becoming purified, and whatever else we're doing, even if we are only mixed in our devotional service, we want to serve Krishna, but we also have many material desires, then Krishna will purify those material desires away as time goes on, provided we are very steady in our commitment to chanting Hare Krishna every day. Okay.
One question.
Yeah.
We just talked about Archana, and we can, dance in front of deities.
Yeah.
And this is another form of Archana. What is the significance? Why do we dance? And before coming to Krishna consciousness, every time I have seen Aarti, people usually stand and seriously they, they sing the Aarti, but I have never seen.
ISKCON group people are a little wild.
Yeah. I have seen that question a lot of times.
Well, what we're doing, actually, if you want to understand it, say for instance you're a man and you're walking down a street and some flower pot falls from a high window and it hits you on the head and you become amnesiac. You can't remember who you are. This happens to people sometimes, a sudden blow on the head, and a person forgets who they are. And so the cure from amnesia is that people gradually try to reintroduce you to your previous setting. You may not remember your name, you may not remember who your wife was, you may not remember that you have children, you may not remember where you lived, but when they find out where you live, they gradually reintroduce you to your environment. And by seeing your home, by seeing your room, by looking at a book with your signature in it, with your name, by talking to your wife, by seeing your children, gradually the memory starts to come back. So Krishna consciousness is exactly the same thing. We were once with Krishna, we had a relationship, we were dancing in the spiritual world, but suddenly we wind up in Reading, Pennsylvania, and or Reading, Pennsylvania, and we've forgotten everything about Krishna, and we wonder, gee, what is this Krishna business? It's like being in amnesia. But in the spiritual world, people dance. In the spiritual world, people perform arti. The gopis, that's what they're doing. Sometimes they don't use elaborate stuff, but they perform arti for Krishna. They dance with Krishna, and people are singing songs glorifying Krishna. This is what people do in the spiritual world. And we're doing it in the same way, kind of as an amnesiac doing it. That, you know, we're doing it, but we don't exactly remember why we're doing it. But little by little, the memory and the emotions of being once in the spiritual world become revived. So by hearing about Krishna, you know, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Krishna book stories, or by, you know, chanting about Krishna, or performing arti to Krishna, dancing in front of deities, all these things help to remind us of the spiritual world that we left behind and now are trying to come back to. And this process of Krishna consciousness is reminding us of a world that we left behind. And that's not an accident. All these activities that we're doing now, we will be doing the same activities in the spiritual world. Except for maybe, you know, going to Kmart and buying stuff for home problems. I probably won't be doing that in the spiritual world. But something similar, you know. Yeah.
Maharaj, I just wanted to elaborate on this point of dancing, because it is very important that, you know, we kind of have a proper clarification on this one. It is spiritual life or spiritual world is something, not a thing of a physical state. It is of a conscious.
Yeah.
So a devotee could be perfectly be on the material plane and standing in front of the deities in Reading, Pennsylvania, but he or she could be totally into a spiritual realm.
Mm-hmm.
So this dancing is basically, I think, my understanding is the form of your representation of spiritual ecstasy. Why somebody would dance or go back and forth or put their hands into the air is kind of they're feeling happy about what they are doing.
Mm-hmm.
It is the representation of the happiness that they are exhibiting or they're experiencing in relishing the holy name. And it does, just if you're on your own, it might not happen so easily, and that's a very high stage of your spiritual realization. But in the group, it is a lot more easier to come about. It's like somebody else is doing, and he's telling us, okay, don't raise the hand in the air, but at least just come back and forth with me. That's the kind of starting point, and then we feel kind of, because that has happened to me 14 years back, 15 years back, when I came to Krishna consciousness and I came to ISKCON temple in Tobacco. Somebody like grabbed my hand and started me with the kirtan, and I didn't know what was happening, but it kind of started working, you know. After a while, I also started pulling people around with me. So
it's contagious.
Contagious thing. But what I'm trying to say is it's kind of a symptom of somebody who is relishing the spirituality, or relishing the happiness, like they're happy about doing something. And in general, people go to the nightclubs and dance over there. Why? To feel happy about it. So dance itself is a form of exhibiting happiness, and when you are dancing in front of Krishna, is like you're trying to, even if you are not, Radhanath Swami often says, even if you don't feel enthusiastic, or you are not enthusiastic, try to pretend being enthusiastic, and somehow or the other you come to a stage, you will feel happy about it. So dancing is kind of that. You just basically are trying to please the Lord with your whole body, engaging it.
We're trying to use all the senses.
All the senses, yes. So that's
When you're chanting and dancing, you're using pretty much all the senses.
all the senses. Kirtan is the easiest form of engaging all the senses at once. Thank you, Master.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. We'll start.
Chandrasekhar Swami ki
कर सकते हैं महाराज गा भी सकते हैं we'll chant whatever is
So someone will take me to the
Yeah.
bus station.
Yeah, we have a lot of time.
it's only 1 o'clock right now.
Oh, I see. What time does the bus?
3 o'clock.
3.
Yeah.
Okay.
Raji, would you like to do Aarti or Kirtan?
Let me do our chant.
That's only.
Let me put my book away.
This is the only thing we are doing for the connectivity. Otherwise, you cannot go anywhere. There is no train. You cannot go to anything else. Yeah.
Only bus.
Yeah.
Maharaj will chant.
Aarti.
He'll do the perform
आप करिए.
आप कौन सा डेकोरेशन करोगे
हरे कृष्ण चलेगा. और उसमें नॉर्मल जो अभिषेक है. तो आरती में कोई आदमी होगा.
if somebody can go and get the kids from upstairs.
Yeah.
Hare
Chant please with me.
Hare Krishna
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna,
Krishna
Krishna,
Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna
Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna
Krishna,
Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vriksha Swami Hare
Nayo Vishnupada, Tanhamsa Paramika Chariot, O Tansa Vishnu Langres AC, Bhakti Vriksha Ki, Ananda Gaudiya Vaishnava Ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki, ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki, Premsika Ho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Sati Gaur Bhakti Vriksha Ki, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath, Shamakun Radhakun Giri Govardhana Ki, Vrindavan Dham Ki, Mayapur Navadvipa Ki, Ayodhya Dham Ki, Dwarka Dham Ki, Jagannath Puri Dham Ki, Eka Chakra Dham Ki, Ganga Mai Ki, Yamuna Mai Ki, Tulsi Devi Ki, Bhakti Devi Ki, Transcendental Book Distribution Ki, Harinam Sankirtan Ki, Transcendental Prasad Distribution Ki, Sam Veda Bhaktivinoda Ki, Gaur Premanandi. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to some of the devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
Namaste Nara Singhaya. Namaste Nara Singhaya. Namaste Nara Singhaya. Namaste Nara Gaur Premanande.
Thank you, Maharaji, for gracing us with your presence today. We look forward for more of your association in the future. New York is not very far, so you will see there is a direct bus from here to today. And if required, we can definitely bring you here, and so that's not a problem. So we definitely look forward to more of your association in the future to Reading. Thank you all. I think we have a question.
Just a request, could you tell to the kids like what exactly they should, any message that you have for the kids at this point in time?
Well, all of our young people here.
All the kids.
Wow, look at everybody here. Okay, so one of these days, you're little kids in that right now, but you won't be little kids forever. One of these days, you're going to be in the world. And the world will want you to spend all your time to make money. And if your material desires are very big, you will agree, yes, I should spend all my time making money. But that's a very big waste of your life. So, only one person can keep you from wasting your life, and that is you. No one else can keep you from wasting your life. And so one day you will have to make the decision that I don't want to waste my life. And to make that decision means you have to change what you're doing. So right now we're just learning, making baby steps, chanting Hare Krishna a little bit, and so on and so forth. But one of these days we'll be older and we'll be in the world and we'll be making decisions. And how we make our decisions, what we use our time to do, that's what will make a difference. So hopefully when you get older, you'll see that most people are wasting their life and you won't want to do the same thing. You realize that I should spend my life trying to be connected to Krishna. All right. Hare Krishna.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Maharaj. So thank you to all the devotees to come here for the program today. And now we can honor the prasad. Thank you, Krishna Kumar Dattaruji. Sorry, I forgot about you totally. All the devotees who doesn't know him, he used to be in New York or New Jersey area, and recently he has moved to Harrisburg area. And because of all his efforts, Maharaji has been, he's here with us and providing his association. So big Hari Bol for Krishna Kumar Dattaruji. Sorry, we totally forgot about it. Thank you, everybody. Hare Krishna.
Chandrasekhar Swami Maharaj
Ki Jai.
Prabhupada Ki
Jai.
Gaur Premanande.
Hari Bol.
No, I can't think anything.
If anybody would like to, if they have any more questions and you would like to talk one-to-one, Maharaji is here. Shadapuram, you want to sing? Okay, come on.
You'd rather than do the prasad?
Yep. Come on, start.
Mahaprasade Govinde,
Mahaprasade Govinde,
Nama Brahmane Vaishnave,
Nama Brahmane Vaishnave,
Sapunya Tanyara,
Swapunya Tanyara, Vishwasvana Jaya,
Sariyar Vidyadar,
Sariyar Vidyadar,
Jori Nitayekar,
Jore Niyatayekar,
Jiva Preve Sai Sore,
Jiva
महाप्रसादम की ये लगा अरे ये आ गया टाइम से आ गया देखा मैंने आपको क्या तो इसको इधर कर दो ना बहुत मजा आ गया अरे ये आपकी
आप इतना अच्छा प्रोग्राम ऑर्गेनाइज करते हो हम आपने अपना घर भगवान को अर्पण कर दिया है पूरा।
तो भी वही कृपा है आप लोग आते हैं
यहाँ पर हम लोग
चल बेटा खाने पहले प्रसाद लो
Papa, Keshav needs to show me like the website for us to go.
ठीक है देखेंगे
Papa, he needs to show it to me online.
अभी नहीं अभी